You're listening to the Trade Show Insights Podcast, Season 19, Episode 4. I'm your host and exhibit marketing strategist, Marlis Arnold, bringing you tools to improve your exhibit results. On today's episode, brought to you by the Exhibit Marketers Cafe, we're talking about how to create memorable experiences that engage and impress attendees, whether on or off the show floor. Well, I am excited about my guest today. This is going to be a really fun conversation. I interviewed Wendy a couple of years ago when I was working on the updated edition of Build a Better Trade Show Image, and she shared some great examples of some projects she'd worked on in the book. You'll find in the book. We're going to kind of delve into those a little bit today, but I want to actually give her a quick introduction first. Wendy Porter is a seasoned event strategist and industry thought leader who worked for over 2 decades in marketing and events for major U.S. corporations, including United Healthcare, before founding her own meetings and events company, Wendy Porter Events, LLC, in 2015. Based in Minneapolis, she specializes in both live and virtual events, meetings, trade shows, conferences, and VIP experiences. And we're going to kind of touch on a lot of those ideas today. She's produced over 1,300 events and managed over $200 million in budgets. And Wendy has won numerous national industry accolades and honors, most recently the 2024 Visionary Award with Smart Women in Meetings. Her recent work as vice chair of the government affairs team at the Live Events Coalition yielded a congressional bill that passed the House in April of 2022. So go, Wendy. She also serves on the National Board of Directors of the Live Events Coalition and is the chair and founder of the Minnesota chapter of the LEC. Now, when she's not traveling the world for business or pleasure, you'll find her speaking in German to the plants in her award-winning garden or loving on her Australian Shepherd puppy. Wendy, welcome to Trade Show Insights.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I just have to ask, so does speaking in German make the plants grow better?
Oh, I think so. They're multilingual at my house.
They're bilingual plants. I love it. Well, Wendy, I'm so excited to have you here because you have worked on so many really cool things, cool projects, both, when you were in the corporate world and then also on your own. So I want to talk a little bit, kind of before we delve into some specific examples, talking about why, and you recently wrote a great post about this on LinkedIn, which we'll have the link in the show notes, but you talked about how, there's a real importance of doing things outside the booth to build memorability, create experiences, all that kind of stuff. Can you kind of give us a little bit of a summary of what you talked about in that post and how, creating experiences is such an important part of exhibit marketing?
Yes, for sure. So, I think we've all seen trade shows evolving, especially since we got back from the pandemic. And one of the things that we're seeing is not everybody's coming onto the show floor. So you'll have, clinical people, maybe your tech folks, some of the more junior staff walking the show floor, but your executive team is most likely not even stepping foot on that floor. So it's really important that you are not only thinking about the audience that is on the show floor and how you appeal to what their needs are, but then also creating events for after hours to make sure that you're tapping into the executive team and the decision makers that you also really want to talk to at that trade show. So you need to be really thinking about a dual planning process, what's happening on the floor and then what's happening after hours.
I think that's a really good point because, like you said, it's not just what happens in the booth, it's what happens outside as well. So talk about, and I know part of what you've been posting about recently is talking about how, show organizers get upset when exhibitors host things, tangential events, that are unofficial, I guess I should say.
Mhm.
So talk a little bit about how do you address that? What do you see as a solution for that so that an exhibitor can do an offsite event and not get on the bad side of the show?
Right. What I'd really like to see is show organizers embracing those opportunities and really partnering with exhibitors and really finding out what they need. I think a lot of times, they set the sponsorship plans and they put out the prospectus, and that kind of is what it is. And we all have to sort of fit into that structure. And maybe that doesn't necessarily work for all exhibitors. So I work
Mhm.
with a number of startup organizations that simply don't have the budgets to be doing both a spot on the floor, so hosting a trade show space, and then also sponsoring some of these after hours opportunities that the sponsors are offering. And so
Mhm.
they have to make some hard decisions. They have $30,000 total for that show. How are they going to best optimize those dollars? And what I'm seeing is they've decided that these small, more personal after hours events actually yield better results for them than being on the show floor. And it gets back to, where is your audience? And in this case, that particular client really wants to talk to decision makers, and those people aren't on the
Right.
floor. So they're feeling like they have to host something after hours. But then what the sponsor wants to offer is $100,000 networking sponsorship. They don't have $100,000. So
Well, or sponsoring like the whole reception for
exactly.
everybody and their brother, and
Exactly.
that's
That's what
not
I'm
who
saying.
your audience is. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, right? So it's not just about getting your logo on a whatever. It's about a real purposeful event where you're getting the right people in the room and you're exchanging information and having those real dialogues. And that's the challenge. And so what I would
Mhm.
like to see is show owners being more open to these conversations where exhibitors come to them and say, or attendees, I should say, come to them and say, can we come up with a solution where I will pay some money for my people to attend? We will pay for passes to be there. I will pay you some additional money for the access to your audience, and then let us create our event wherever that's going to be, local to the show still, but create
Mhm.
our event to talk to your audience and get a really curated audience at the event that we want to host. I'd love to see an evolution to something like that. I think it would
It,
be a win-win for all.
and have you had any of your clients that have actually reached out to show management and talked to them and started this kind of conversation? Have you seen any kind of results from that?
We haven't really, and it's something I think we need to do more of. Oftentimes, we're brought in a little bit late in the process. So if I'm able to do that with a client where I'm working with on the very front end of the planning, I will certainly, get in there and discuss that with a sponsoring organization. But oftentimes, we're brought in after the client has made a decision to host a reception or a networking event. They're not going to be exhibiting on the floor, and then I'm making do with what we have to deal with. So
Hmm.
I think the key is early planning, right?
Yeah,
Being involved in
exactly.
the front end.
Yeah, yeah. Start with that perspective of how can we work with the show and bring this event, into the
Into the fold.
official, yeah,
Yep,
into the official arena of what they're producing for the entire event. So
correct. Yep.
so let's talk a little bit about some of the examples of some of the events that you've done, and I know we shared several of these in the book. Some of my favorites, you talked about, the Kennedy Center event. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Yeah, so we were hosting or sponsoring, I should say, a large event in Washington, D.C. And we knew we wanted an experience where we were bringing together the executives from my side of the house with the executives that we were partnering with in the sponsorship. And so we created an event at the Kennedy Center. So we rented out the rooftop of the Kennedy Center,
Mm,
which has a restaurant up there. It's an event space, really, but you can set it up for a fairly large number of people. And then it also has access to their outside patio. So we created this lovely event in the evening, and we brought in the White House chef at the time.
wow.
Actually, it was the former White House chef. He had just stepped away. Walter Scheib was his name. And Walter was with the White House, I believe, for 13 years. So he came in under the Clintons and then stayed into the first term of George W. Bush. Um, and he just had amazing stories. And he had just come out with a book called The White House Chef, which
Mm.
was a compilation of stories about his time in the White House, as well as recipes of things
Hmm.
he cooked during his time there. So really riveting conversation. And so we curated this dinner, and every course had a story that went along with it about when he made it
Oh,
and why he made
awesome.
it and who he served it to. So state dinners and, parties with the Bush twins and just different things, right? And so he had a story that went along the whole evening. And then afterwards, he took just questions so people could ask him about anything related to food in the White House. And then we did a book
Priceless.
signing. Yeah.
That's a priceless experience.
It was just amazing. Super, super fun event.
That is so cool. That is so awesome. And you took everything and you made it such an experience. It wasn't just, come hear this famous chef speak. It was let's curate the whole meal around and have him explain what all the dishes are, and so everything became an experience. And it
Correct.
was just, like I said, it was priceless. It was something that they could not have just like, hey, let's go buy a ticket and go have this dinner. It was, let's go have this memorable lifetime, event.
Hmm.
You also did another one, I believe, was it at the Grammy Museum?
Yes, in LA.
Yeah.
That one was really cool too. So same sort of situation where the top floor of the Grammy Museum is an open terrace where you can set up whatever kind of event you want. So again, really thinking from end to end about how to create that experience.
Mhm.
So we started and we had a reception. We had students from the Grammy camps that were there. So young up and coming musicians that were there performing for our
Oh,
music for
cool.
the background. And then had a dinner, and we brought in Wolfgang Puck for the dinner. And then afterwards, we went down a couple levels below is the Clive Davis Theater. And so we went down to the Clive Davis Theater. It was about 50 people, so very small group. And we brought in the producer of the Grammys, Ken Ehrlich, who was the
Mm.
producer for over 30 years of the Grammys. And he ran a sizzle reel, and then he just took questions for 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
So people could just ask him, how did you think of putting Lady Gaga with so and so? Or what was it like working with Michael Jackson? Or talk about Elton John. And, it was just,
Wow.
I mean, the guy has seen everybody and met everybody, right? In his
Yeah.
30 plus years doing this. So it was pretty riveting, and people really enjoyed that event. And honestly, it's my origin story for my company. If you look on my website, I talk about this particular story because when I was in the elevator, same group of people that were at that Kennedy Center event. It was for the
Mhm.
same executives. And one of those executives who was from the other company was in the elevator with me. And we're going down, and she said, Oh, I would never miss a Wendy Porter event. You do the best events. You should start a company, Wendy Porter Events. And so she says this to me, back in 2012-ish. I don't know, somewhere in there. And it was 2015 that I actually did that. So that's kind of my origin story where that nugget was planted in my mind.
That's funny. That's funny. What a great story. I mean, it's true. It's like you were producing these events that were completely unforgettable,
Hmm.
and something that people looked forward to. Like you said, if you were in charge of it every year and they knew each time there was going to be something really exciting to look forward to. But obviously those are like mega event. I mean,
Right.
those were not low budget events,
Right.
but there are ways that exhibitors can do smaller events and still make them really memorable.
Mhm.
Um, and another one I know, and it wasn't necessarily a really small event, but a really cool event that you did in New Orleans that was actually a booth staff
Correct.
and company, internal event.
Mhm.
But I think that's something that could be scaled down even more to a smaller group. So tell us a little bit about that one, because I think it was so cool. You actually like started the event before the event,
Right. Right.
essentially, for that one. So tell us that story.
Right. So, that particular sponsorship, we had a really large booth. I think it was a 13,000 square foot booth, if you can
Wow.
kind of wrap your head around that. So it was large, right? So we had about 130 staff that were at this event. So it was about 100 staffers and 30 executives that were involved in this event. So we always did a pre-event training. because that's a lot of people and a lot of wheels in motion
Mm-hmm.
for everybody to understand how this booth is going to operate and what happens where and how do you refer and all that.
Oh, I'm
So
all about exhibitor
yeah.
education,
So
as you
we
know.
always did the pre-training meeting. Okay. So we had the pre-training meeting. And then after that, we usually did some sort of dinner for the group so people could get to know each other and just have an enjoyable evening before we all hit the floor for 3 days of many, many long hours.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we did this, instead of renting a shuttle, we actually did a New Orleans parade. And so we
Love
brought
it.
in the traditional New Orleans parade. We had, of course, work with the city to block off streets and things. But we walked from the New Orleans Convention Center over to a restaurant that was, I don't know, half a mile away, maybe not quite that far, but
Not
not
a
too
terribly
far.
long
Yeah,
walk.
not a
Yeah.
terribly long walk. And so we did it by way of walking with this New Orleans traditional jazz parade. So everyone got to experience what that was like. And then we went to this restaurant, a really cool location that was a very vintage, traditional kind of New Orleans location.
Tons of
Um,
history.
Tons of history, brought in all the traditional food. We had a jazz band there. We had a guy painting the scene. So we actually
That's
had
such a
a,
cool detail too. I love
yeah,
that. That's something, again, very unique for your event.
yep. And so we had this beautiful, it was actually an oil painting, beautiful oil painting that, of course, took a few days to dry.
Right.
And then I had to ship back to the office, and our CEO loved it so much, she framed it and put it up in the office
Oh, awesome.
with a little plaque on it about what it was,
Yeah,
where it was
exactly.
captured. We had tarot card readers and voodoo dolls for the centerpieces, so everyone could take a little doll home, and it was just a super fun event. And I had people come up to me afterwards and said, you know, I have my bucket list, and I did not have this walking in a New Orleans parade on my bucket list, but I'm going to write it down on my bucket list and check it off because that was super cool.
I love
So
it.
that was super fun.
Love it. Love it. And again, that's something that you could scale down. I mean, obviously not, maybe not having all the elements, but you could have a really cool dinner for 25, 30 people
Yep.
and incorporate a lot of those same kinds of elements
Hmm.
into a smaller event. So
Yep.
I love that. I think a lot of times exhibitors think, especially like you said, you deal with a lot of startups and a lot of smaller exhibitors, and they think, well, we don't have this major budget, we can't throw these big kinds of events. Well, if you really look at, and going back to what you said about spending 25 or $50,000 or whatever to be an official sponsor of something on the menu of options that the show provides, you're getting a lot more bang for your buck by investing the money in this small, more intimate, more experiential event.
Hmm.
So I think that's a really important thing that exhibitors need to just kind of start thinking about. How can we invest this same amount of money in something that's really going to produce that ROI?
Right. And I know you talk about this. I mean, it's about creating a memory, right?
Yeah.
That's what creates stickiness. So I talk about events a lot on, do you remember back when you were, let's go back to college, for example. Do you remember what your college looked like on a brochure? Or do you remember an event that they created when you were in college? You
Yeah.
remember that event, even
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
right? You don't remember what it looked like on a piece of paper. So
Yeah.
that's why, when you're looking at marketing dollars and how you're going to invest those marketing dollars, it's really important to be thinking about investing those in experiences that create those memories and that brand stickiness for people.
Well, exactly. And I can remember back years ago, I mean, many years ago, I was at Book Expo in New York, and one of the publishers sponsored a circle cruise, sunset circle cruise around New York Harbor,
Hmm.
and so they gave us the Billy Joel CD of New York on My Mind.
Nice.
And then there was, of course, one of the celebrity authors was on the cruise. We could, go up and chat with him. And it was so memorable and such a fabulous experience, and something that, yeah, I could have bought a ticket and hopped on and taken a cruise by myself, but to have this whole experience with other attendees and being able to network and, talk with the author and all those kinds of things, it was something that, like we've said about your other events that you've produced, it's something that people can't buy. They
Mm-hmm.
can't just go out and buy this experience. It's like it's the whole package. It's
Mm-hmm.
all put together for them in such a special and memorable, unique way. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit there, talking about, and you mentioned on the New Orleans how you got them there by having the New Orleans parade, but there's some other ways that you could do some creative transportation. Even if you had just you know more of a basic dinner, there's some things that you could do. What are some other creative transportation methods
Yeah.
that you've
So
used?
in San Diego, we were at a conference in the lamp district, and we had a small dinner happening for some high prospective contacts, right? So we wanted to
Mm-hmm.
create a really fun evening, and the way that we got them to the dinner was by pedicab.
Oh, fun.
So we had these branded pedicabs that were already sitting right outside the convention. So when sessions broke, 5 o'clock or whatever it was, we were like, just come right outside and you'll be transported to the event. And we just took them by this, slew of pedicabs that went down the street to take them to the restaurant. And it ended up being really fun. So that was a nice way to just get them there, have a fun experience, because pedicabs are kind of big in San Diego, and have our brand connected to it, and people would see it on the street, and it,
Well,
serve
exactly. Yeah, there
multiple
was that added
reasons.
branding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Well, we've talked a lot about doing, off-site events, but there's also some very clever things that you've done on the show floor as well. I know, especially there was one particular one that you have, and we'll have a link for this in the show notes. There, you've got a whole slideshow on your website of all of this. It was a whole experience that was created with all different kinds of activity stations, I guess you could call it, on the show floor. So tell us a little bit
Mhm.
about that.
Yeah, that gets back to that 13,000 square foot booth that I was talking about, and
Yeah.
all the different elements we had inside of that booth to keep people engaged. It was kind of interesting because I don't know what the stat is now, but the average, time that someone would stop at an exhibitor booth is like 3 minutes or something. And we would have
Mhm.
people in our booth, and I'm not kidding you, for up to 3 hours
Oh,
wandering
wow.
around to all the different things that there were to do.
Well, of course,
So
13,000 square feet, that's
yes,
basically like a little trade show of
It
its own.
it it really was. So we had everything from, experts in the booth that could sit down and talk about the products. In this case, it was insurance products. So this is back when I was at United Healthcare. So we could get experts discussing plans. We had a member corner. So if you were a current customer and you had a question or an issue, we had dedicated customer service people right there on the spot. You could come in and sit down and deal with a certain issue that you might be trying to resolve. We had healthcare screenings going on for free. We had demonstration projects happening showing, this was way before the pandemic, so showing telehealth, which
Mm,
now is a normal thing, but back
right.
then was brand new and no one had ever heard of it. We had an 80-foot semi trailer on the floor that um, at times showed the demonstration project of telehealth and how that would work. And at
Mhm.
times we used that actually as a virtual clinic where we were doing health screenings in that
Mm.
80-foot semi. We had demonstrations around CSR, so doing some corporate responsibility things in the booth where we were sitting down and we were just doing really simple projects, making cards for kids that we then donated
Aw.
to local children's hospitals. We had a massage therapy area so people could just take a break and sit in this really immersive space within the booth that had beautiful music. And we had the massage therapist there. And while we were waiting in line, because that booth or that section of the booth would have quite long lines,
Oh,
we had a
right.
Tai Chi instructor that was there
Hmm.
teaching people about Tai Chi and movement. And so
Oh,
they were
interesting.
doing Tai Chi while they were in line, waiting to get their massage.
Hmm.
We actually had a dance corner for a while where we brought in Zumba instructors and people could get in there and actually do some Zumba with one of our instructors.
Fun.
We demoed uh, a bicycle project that we were doing where people could get on a bicycle and like pick their route. So the computer was set up so you could say, I want to be in Central Park in New York. So up would come the bike route in Central Park in New York, and then you were racing each other on these
Oh,
bikes,
funny.
and they would have the stats up there about how fast are you going and how many calories are you burning right now. And so we made this sort of competitive thing in the booth for that. So we just tried to really think outside the box and create a lot of different activations within the booth. So it was
Mhm.
more than just coming in for the free giveaway.
Yeah. Well, and again, not everybody has a 13,000 square foot
Right.
booth space to work with, but you
Right.
can pick and choose some of these elements that then you can put in your booth. And I really like your idea of, they're waiting in line for the massage, but you've got them doing activities while they're waiting in line, because I always tell exhibitors, if you're going to do anything, if you're going to have a celebrity signing autographs, or you're going to have people waiting on some kind of an activity or whatever, work the line. Don't
Exactly.
just have people standing there getting bored and checking their phones or whatever. Be doing something, engaging with them.
Hmm.
So I love that. So do you remember, I know this was a long time ago, but do you remember any kind of stats as far as the lead capture results that you got from that, all those activations? I know you had long dwell time, but besides
Yeah,
that.
the dwell time is what really resonates with me. I know, we always had good leads out of that, and really that event was more about, brand impression, like just making a good
Mm.
impression to people of who we were as a
Mm-hmm.
company, right? And offering all the right things to help people live healthier lives at the time. Um, so I don't, at the tip of my tongue, I don't have stats on that, but we always had, good leads that came out of that. We had good engagement with current customers and just made the right impression.
Well,
Um,
and no problem following up either with having people remember the experience in your
right,
booth. I mean,
right.
a lot of times that's a hurdle for exhibitors, is when they follow up, then the person doesn't necessarily remember visiting their booth. But in your case, they're going to remember
Yeah.
all the different things they did in the booth.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's one other thing I want to touch on related to that experience. So, one of the things I really encouraged our team to do, and I used to put this up in our staff office, was I had the quote from Maya Angelou that talks about, people won't remember what you said, they won't remember
Mm,
what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel, something to that effect.
exactly.
I
Yeah.
had that quote on the wall in our office so that people could remember why they were there. Yes, they were taking days away from work and busy office days, but they were there to make an impact on people. And we had what we called our Alice stories. And so I would ask everybody, and I met a woman named Alice at an event who came up to me, and she was just turning 65 and eligible for Medicare. And she was very upset when she learned that she was going to have to pay something into Medicare. She didn't know that there was a fee that she had to pay
Hmm.
every month into Medicare to get access to her health plan. And she's like, I'm going to have to pick between my health care and eating. I mean, literally, that's what
Mm.
she was telling me this, and it was her birthday, and she was just very upset. And I said, you know what? There's probably some extra help that would be available to you. Let me get you over to one of our experts that can sit down and see if you qualify for that. Right? She had no clue that these programs existed. So I got her over to an expert. They sat down, and sure enough, she qualified for some extra help, and she was
Oh,
going to be
wow.
able to get this covered and get some additional things because of her life circumstances. And so I feel like in that day, I sort of changed her life. Right? She came to me in
Hmm.
tears, not knowing what she was going to do tomorrow.
Oh.
And now all of a sudden she had a solution because we got her to the right expert. So that was Alice. And so I always encouraged our team to have an Alice story. And I wanted them to report back to me after the event. What was your Alice story? So
Oh,
we had a
cool.
guy that came into our booth and did a health screen, and his blood pressure was off the charts. And one of our staffers talked to him about it and said, hey, do you take blood pressure medicine? And the guy said, yeah, I do, but I forgot to take it today. And he said,
Mm.
well, I really think, we need to get you home so you can take your medicine. And he's like, yeah, but, I had to take the bus to the bus to the bus to get to this event. And
Oh,
that's,
wow.
that's hard for me to do. And so they were, pushed him to really convince him that this was important. He needed to go home and take his medicine because his blood pressure was super, super high.
Mm.
So my staffer kind of watched him as this guy left to see, is he going to leave and go and do what we just told him to do? Or is he just going to keep walking around the show? And of course he was going to keep walking around the show.
Mm.
So my guy went out to him and said, hey, I'm just going to, let's go. I'm just taking you home. Put him in an Uber or a taxi, whatever it was, took
Yeah.
him to his apartment, said, okay, I want to see you take that medicine. Went into his apartment, watched the guy take his medicine, and then he left and came back to the event. I mean, that's how far he went to
Wow.
make sure this guy was taken care of.
Wow.
And
That is
so,
really above and beyond.
yeah, really above and beyond. But those were the kinds of things I really encourage was, make a difference to these people. So when you're on the show floor, it's not just about, selling your widget, right? Like make a difference to the people that you're talking to. Why do they need your product? What is it going to do in their life or in their business or whatever they do that's going to make an end difference to whoever you're trying to serve? That's what you need to focus on. And
Wow.
that will create a memory.
Wow, that is so amazing. That I think all of us now are going to be thinking of our Alice stories whenever we go to a trade show, because it's true. You really are, you're not just connecting on a business level, you're connecting on a personal level. And if you really do a good job of that, it's going to be memorable for a lifetime for
Hmm.
these people that experience it. So Wendy, thank you so much for coming and sharing your experiences and your innovations of things that you've done over the years, and you've provided us with just tons of inspiration for future events. So thank you so much.
You are most welcome. It's been a pleasure.
If you enjoyed today's episode and would like more, you can subscribe to the Trade Show Insights podcast and automatically receive future episodes on your chosen device. Simply search for Trade Show Insights in Apple, Spotify, or virtually anywhere else that podcasts are found, then click the subscribe button. Trade Show Insights is protected by the Creative Commons copyright license. You may feel free to share this recording with colleagues or embed it on your own blog as long as it's shared in its entirety and is not used for commercial purposes. To learn more, please see the link in the sidebar of the show notes at tradeshowinsights.com. Well, that's it for this episode of Trade Show Insights. Be sure to check out our show notes and archives at tradeshowinsights.com. You can also connect with me using the social media links or the contact page on the site. I'm Marlis Arnold. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us next time for more tools to improve your exhibit results.